Welcome to the German Council on Foreign Relations, and welcome to this week's edition of our Thursday morning briefings at the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP. My name is Jan Stöckmann, and I'm head of the Director's Office here at DGAP. It is my great pleasure to be chairing this morning's briefing. This week, we are looking at the situation in the Middle East after Saturday's first direct attack on Israel by Iran, which came in the wake of the bombing of the Iranian embassy in Damascus on the 1st of April. While most of the Iranian drones and rockets were intercepted, there is widespread concern about the implications for the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas and for regional stability more generally. Since Iran's attack on the weekend, we have seen a number of reactions. The UN Security Council held an emergency session. Members of the G7 condemned Iran and declared their commitment to stabilizing the region. On Tuesday, EU foreign ministers agreed to expand sanctions on Iran's missile and drone program, followed on Wednesday by EU leaders' discussions in Brussels on more specific actions, including the move floated yesterday by Olaf Scholz to designate the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization. On Wednesday as well, both the UK and German foreign ministers, David Cameron and Annalena Baerbock, were in Israel urging restraint. Some observers argued that the new situation might give Israel some leverage to free the remaining hostages in Gaza and make progress towards a peaceful settlement. But of course, there are many open questions and a lot of potential for escalation. So what are the motives and dynamics at play in Israel and Iran? How might the situation evolve over the next weeks? And what does it mean for the people on the ground in Israel and Gaza? And what, if anything, can European leaders do to prevent further escalation? To discuss these questions and many more questions that you will ask in the Q&A, we are very grateful and honored to welcome two excellent speakers today who agreed to come on short notice. So thanks for joining. Sophie von der Tann is a correspondent for the German broadcaster ARD based in Tel Aviv since 2021. Prior to that, she worked at the Berlin Bureau of Bayerischer Rundfunk, and she holds a dual master's degree from Columbia and LSE and a BA in Theology and Middle Eastern Studies from the University of Oxford and has won several prizes. Thanks for joining us, Sophie. Next will be Ali Fathollah-Nejad, who is founder and director of the Center for Middle East and Global Order in Berlin. He holds several affiliations, including a McCloy Fellow with the American Council in Germany. And I should mention, he was previously an associate fellow of DGAP at the now defunct Middle East and North Africa program. Ali holds a PhD from SOAS in London. Glad to have you, Ali. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping announcements. We would like to remind you that this event is being recorded and will be uploaded subsequently. We will kick off our conversation on the panel with about 5 minutes of intro statements each, and then open up for questions and answers after about 20-25 minutes. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and then when invited to speak, briefly introduce yourself and keep your question or comment relatively short so we can take up as many as possible. Finally, just a word of thanks to my colleagues in the events department and elsewhere at DGAP, Milan Nitsch, Henning Hoff, Julia Löwer, Helga Beck, and others who are making this event series possible. Now, without much further ado, over to you, Sophie. What's the political situation from your perspective at the moment? How's Netanyahu's war cabinet likely to react? And what does it mean for the conflict and the context?
So in Israel, we're basically in a waiting game. We're wondering when, how, and up until a few days ago, if Israel would react. That seems to be clear now that that is going to happen. We've seen now the first visits of international politicians. Yesterday, David Cameron and Annalena Baerbock coming here, trying to convince Israel that this was a defensive victory, that they shouldn't retaliate to further escalate. But this narrative doesn't really seem to resonate here in Israel. Technically, it would be possible to settle with this. The attack caused very little damage, considering how big this attack was. It is a victory militarily and politically, considering that this was a very successful coalition with Western allies and Arab nations supporting it. But for Israel, and this is what we keep on hearing from analysts and experts here, this attack has changed the rules on the ground. The first openly Iranian attack on Israeli territory one may also have to mention that the attack in Syria, which is widely believed to have been carried out by Israel, also probably changed the rules for the Iranians, which has led to this whole situation. But Israeli officials have made it clear now that there will be a response. Some reportedly even wanted to retaliate immediately, even during that night, worried about mounting international pressure not to do so. So if we assume now that this retaliation will happen at some point, the question remains how. Is it going to be indirect on Iran's proxies in the region, for example, in Lebanon, in Syria? We've seen these kind of covert activities in the past years, but many experts that I've been speaking to say that probably won't be enough for Israel because, as I said, these rules on the ground have changed due to this direct attack. Because Iran has chosen to make this a direct war, and Israel may want to also make a direct statement. So what could a direct attack look like? Lots of speculations on that. What could possible targets be? Possibly military targets, rocket launchers, manufacturing sites, perhaps something related to the nuclear program, probably trying to not inflict any harm on the civilian population in order not to let this escalate any further. Yet the Iranians have made it very clear that Israel responds in any way, they would then respond again. So we might be headed for some sort of tit for tat that could easily spiral into a wider escalation. And this is what everybody's so worried about. And I mean, generally speaking, we take it that Israel's not interested in a fully blown out war with Iran, but is trying to tread this line of somewhat reacting and showing strength, and yet not letting it spiral. And during the past few days, when we've seen how Western leaders tried to influence Israel's decision-making, there have been these kind of almost contradictory sounding urges all the time. Well, do retaliate, do show strength, but then not as much as spiraling into something else. And I think that's going to be the big dilemma that we'll be seeing here over the next few days. And that's very hard to predict as to what that's going to lead to.
What's your assessment of, thanks for those opening statements, what's your assessment of the difference that both European leaders on the one hand, but also the US have in urging Israel into a certain direction? What difference does it make that David Cameron and Annalena Baerbock came to Israel for government talks? In which direction do you see this likely developing?
I mean, on the one hand, these Western allies are very important for Israel. And we've seen this Saturday night. This coalition enabled Israel as well to fend off this attack. And the US is the major military partner for Israel. The US plays a major role here. If I would say Israel listens to anybody, it would probably be the US. And that then obviously plays a role for Gaza as well. However, if we look at how Netanyahu responded yesterday, saying, well, you've made all your suggestions and recommendations, thanks for that, but we'll decide ourselves. We will make a decision as to how we react, and we'll be able to defend ourselves. So generally speaking, I do think international pressure now makes a difference here and is heard. But in the end, Israel doesn't want to curb to what happened and wants to make some sort of statement. And we could, of course, also very much observe how things have changed with regards to this international pressure, because just before this attack, all eyes were on Gaza. All eyes were on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. There was massive mounting international pressure to let in more humanitarian aid. And there was a lot of criticism of Israel's conduct of the war in Gaza. That focus has now totally shifted. And now we have a situation where Western allies clearly say, okay, there's ironclad support, yet they don't want to be dragged into war either. So it's a very delicate balancing act.
Thanks a lot. I'm sure we will come back to what this reaction will look like exactly in the Q&A. But for now, let me turn over to Ali for your opening statement. Perhaps you could help us, Ali, to make sense of Iran's motive. In a recent article, you argued that the Iranian leadership is fully aware of the geopolitical consequences. So what are those consequences and what's Iran's strategy?
So good morning. Very glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Good to be back to the DGAP, although merely virtually. First of all, I agree with whatever Sophie has said so far. To respond to your questions about Iranian motivations, basically pressure was mounting on the Iranian side because of Iranian reluctance vis-a-vis a series of high-profile targeted assassinations carried out by Israel against key military figures of Iran and its so-called axis of resistance, starting with Al-Aruri in Beirut, who was a high-ranking Hamas member, who was also very much key in terms of the collaboration with Hezbollah and Iran. And then later on, we had the assassination in the Damascus suburb that is seen as an IRGC stronghold of the most senior IRGC commander, Razi Mousavi. And more lately, we had the assassination of a leading IRGC commander in Damascus at the hands of Israel again, probably, who was in charge of Iran's regional policies for the last 2 decades. And he was actually in charge of Iranian military operations in the Levant, in Syria and Lebanon. So, and so this latest incident, which happened on April 1st, the so-called Iranian consulate, although this whole discussion merits a bit more qualification. Maybe we're going to have some more time after that. So there was a lot of pressure on the Iranian side to actually react to those targeted assassinations because of the reluctance since December. And this reluctance was due because of Iranian fears of an all-out war with Israel and potentially drawing in the United States, which would jeopardize regime stability and security. And so this is quite a Iranian red line. So pressure was mounting. So the Iranians had to react to that because there was also growing frustration, notably, within Iran's domestic hardline supporter base, but also within the axis of resistance, given the wide gulf between the fire and rhetoric coming out of Tehran, and also on one hand, and on the other, Iran reluctance to respond directly to those aforementioned high-profile targeting of key military figures of Iran. So those were extremely costly, but the Iranian side needed some face-saving measures because it feared that it's going to lose credibility among this supporter bases. Hence, also, what happened on Saturday night, but also hence the nature of the attack. Of course, it was quantitatively, it was a kind of a massive attack, and it was quite a game-changing moment as well because of the very direct nature of the attack. It was, of course, unprecedented. But, the use of the weapon systems indicates that Iran was not after provoking a major war with Israel and or the United States. So what Iran used were, very low-flying drones and also some of the missiles that were not really hitting. And so, it was not the best weapons, first of all. And also, there was an advance notice to some Middle Eastern governments who, of course, would inform the Americans, including Turkey, about an impending military strike by Iran. Although the US side now says that there was no such thing, but I believe that indeed there was an advance notice to the American side. So it was not a surprise attack. So basically, even, I mean, before actually the military operation was finished, the Iranian side, first by the Iranian representation at the United Nations and later on by the Chief of Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, said that in their view, the mission was accomplished. So this is an indication that for Iran, this was a face-saving demonstration of power. While there was no interest to provoke Israel into an all-out war, which, as I suggested earlier, would be a tremendous risk to the viability and to the stability of the regime.
So if the resolution of this conflict is a lot about face-saving solutions, then it's also interesting to look at the way in which the Iranian attack was portrayed in Iran. And we've seen a lot of fake videos circulate, and there's certainly an element of information warfare going on as well. So I'd be interested to hear from you what role this plays in the resolution of the conflict. And perhaps you could also say a few words on what you think international brokers might do to help both Iran and Israel to come out with a face-saving solution to this conflict. And after that, we'll open up for Q&A with the audience, so get your questions ready.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there were a lot of memes actually circulating among Iranians on social media, when suggesting that Iran was not actually launching, missiles, but cucumbers. But I mean, we also have a lot of footage that some of the rockets did not have explosives on them. Some of them even dropped inside of the Iranian territory. Those were not the most sophisticated weapons Iran had. Of course, this could also mean that for the Israeli side, this was a realization potentially of the limited military capabilities of Iran. But then again, Iran did not unleash its whole arsenal of military power, which would include the activation of Lebanon's Hezbollah, with its rockets arsenal of at least 150,000 that could be dropped upon Israel and would also circumvent the air defense systems of Israel because of the sheer quantity. But then, this scenario would only be, likely if the Islamic Republic is directly threatened. So, because Hezbollah constitutes a kind of survival, insurance for Iran. So they're not going to, to use that before the moment they have to do. Of course, I mean, from the Iranian side, this was, celebrated as a major victory. There was the supporter base that was cheering on the street, but which is a tiny minority in Iran. The footage of which we've seen across all of Western media, but wider Iranian society does not support this kind of military adventurism, and this is not news. This has been a development that we've seen at least over the past decade in terms of Iranian society's rejection vis-a-vis the kind of adventurism and military interventions that we've seen from the Iranian side in different countries in the region, not least in Syria, because the Iranian society understands that what the Islamic Republic does is purely beneficial to its own interests, to regime interests, and That being said, detrimental to national interests. So there are no illusions there. And when it comes to scenarios for de-escalation, the very nature of this attack allows for such a de-escalation because, I mean, first of all, all sides, I mentioned the Iranian side already, can claim victory. The Israelis can claim victory in terms of, being able to fend off this attack. 99% of the, Iranian, drones and missiles were were intercepted. So this allows a lot of maneuverability on the Israeli side to potentially wait, and also, on the backdrop of this kind of support from, internationally. So this could, and also, I mean, the American side can also claim victory because it has been able to assemble this kind of coalition that was able to intercept. Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of other dimensions that can be mentioned, but I'm looking forward to the discussion later on.
And which we will come back to for sure. Allow me to pick up a question by Steffen Schumacher in the chat about the massacre of the 7th of October being already a kind of declaration of war from the Iranian side. So perhaps, Sophie, you could tell us a little bit about political discourse in Israel, how you perceive it. Both the 7th of October and the 13th of April were unprecedented in their own ways. How has this changed also amongst the population and the political discourse in the country?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. If you talk to Israelis, October 7 has already been like a game changer with regards to its relation to Iran as well, because it's seen as, well, it's an Iranian proxy as well, Hamas, and it's been seen as a kind of more intense direct attack, surprise attack that was, no matter what the direct influence of Iran was, it has also been viewed as a way to change the rules on the ground, and that this is now like gradually increasing. And then looking at Hezbollah in the north, there's been basically a wouldn't call it a fully blown out war because it's been still fairly calculated, but around 100,000 people are displaced in Israel. And that's a big political topic. There's a lot of pressure on the Israeli government to change that situation, to make it safe for these people to return to that area. So over the past months, we've been wondering, when might a Israeli offensive into Lebanon start? In what way, potentially? We've often been wondering, well, maybe it starts in April, May, when spring, summer starts, where it's a very different terrain there. So it's much more hilly. It's much more difficult to operate. So the rainy season, literally weather, has a big impact. Well, let's see what's going to happen now in the face of this Iranian attack, if this is actually going to happen. Strategically, Israel was in a position with regards to the Northern Front to attack a lot of targets that they've been wanting to attack for a long time, Hezbollah targets, without provoking a fully blown out war, and civilians evacuated from the area. So in a way, strategically, for the military, this was a fairly, let's say, opportunistic situation. But now we don't know if this might spiral further because of this direct attack by Iran. And if you ask people here, they're fairly divided, I would say. Many fear that this would spiral into a wider war. If you talk to the hostage families, they're obviously worried that this takes away the focus from the situation in Gaza. And Israel should use it as a leverage, what Iran has done. But there are also people who say, well, we now need to respond in a clear way. This is unprecedented. We can't let this happen. And we need to make a clear sign. We show a clear sign of strength and clear up, whatever that may mean, the situation in the north.
Thanks. Allow me to pick up another question in the chat by Lakrov Ben Krayan about the non-condemnation by Western powers of the Damascus attack and what this meant for the calculation of the Iranian regime in the way they retaliated. So this is, I think, for you perhaps, Ali, and allow me to pick up one more question in the audience. Posted live by Wilhelmine von Preußen. Over to you.
Thanks very much for the briefing. I was wondering what your take is on what's going to happen to Rafah. Do you think that the Israeli government is going to use this moment of international support to actually go ahead with the Rafah operation?
Yeah. Thanks, excellent. So I think we've got one question for you, Ali, and then back to Sophie after that.
Thank you. So the question was if there was international condemnation or Western condemnation regarding the alleged Israeli strike on April 1st on the so-called Iranian consulate, if this would have avoided what happened last weekend. I don't think so. Probably. This may be one of the, points that one would hear from the Iranian official side. But as I explained, there was mounting pressure not only regarding the April 1st incident, but also in a wider context of Israeli high-profile targeted assassinations. So what happened on April 1st was, first of all, it was an Iranian national holiday, so the embassy was closed, and adjacent to the embassy there is the so-called Iranian consulate. So no one really knows if this is really the Iranian consulate, but this is branded as such. And in this building there was a meeting between leading military figures for Iran's regional military operations, probably discussing Iranian strategy and axis of resistance strategy in the context of the Gaza war. So this is and of course one should know that we have a kind of parallel structure within the Iranian political and military architecture. And when it comes to Iran's regional policies, those are, decided upon by the center of power in Iran. That is the so-called Office of the Supreme Leader, which is a quasi-parallel government, plus the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And it's actually the IRGC that is also the diplomatic kind of representative of Iran in the region. So basically the ambassadors of Iran are mostly RGC people. So the RGC is, at the helm of it. And when it comes to the larger discussion of the sanctity of diplomatic premises, we should also note that for the Iranian side, it's not that, this sanctity doesn't hold that much. I mean, first of all, it's a regime that, we have the hostage crisis, which has been, at the outset of the Islamic Republic. So the occupation of the U.S. embassy. Over the last few years, we've seen that in Iran, the sanctity of diplomatic premises was not, guaranteed, because there were mobs attacking and actually burning also foreign embassies, including the Saudi embassy and the UK embassy. So, and those were aided and abetted by the regime's security forces. And last but not least, if we look at Iranian operations inside of Iranian embassies in the West, we see that this IRGC component is very, very strong. There are even terrorist attacks that are coordinated from within Iranian embassies. So this is just to give you the broader context, this whole discussion of the sanctity of diplomatic premises, plus the fact that in terms of international law, there's a controversy whether this strike has been illegal or not, because it was a third country carrying it out. So there are, a few uncertainties here. So what is more important than this discussion is the very fact that Israel has been able to eliminate the highest figures, some of the highest figures of this Hamas-Hezbollah-Iran trio over the last few months.
Thanks. Over to you, Sophie, for the other question.
Regarding the Rafah operation. Well, there's been talks about the Rafah operation for weeks, if not months by now, and we have been waiting for it. At some point, we thought, well, it's not going to happen in the way that it's maybe announced. Then there have been reports that due to the Iranian attack, Israel might have postponed it. Recently, before the attack, troops were moved out of Gaza, especially out of the south as well, out of the Khan Yunis area. Now there are reports that Israel has deployed extra artillery and armored personnel to these APCs, armored personnel carriers, to the Gaza Strip surrounding areas, which could suggest that there might be a ground offensive coming soon. There are also reports that the IDF is preparing tents. None of this has been confirmed from the Israeli side. We also just had a report that the US may approve a Rafah operation if in return for Israel not retaliating against Iran. All of this at the moment is a lot of speculation. It's very hard to know what's actually going to happen, but there is no doubt that Israel has repeatedly said that they want to go to Rafah, that this is one of the strongholds, remaining strongholds of Hamas. However, there are roughly 1.4 million people displaced there. There's still no clear concept as to what would happen with them. And as I said earlier, the situation has changed in the sense that the focus has shifted from Gaza to Israel being under attack by Iran. There is more of a clear support for Israel again. Just before this attack happened, Biden, for the first time, actually kind of indirectly pointed at questioning American support for Gaza with regards to the problematic aid situation. This has really changed now. I mean, now the US is clearly saying ironclad support, even though they signal that they don't want to be dragged into a wider war and that they wouldn't support any kind of operation against Iran. But all of this will probably influence Israeli decision-making when it comes to Gaza and the Rafah operation.
Many thanks. I'd like to pick up one more question from the chat by Thomas Loyek on what Germany can do at this point, and perhaps also link this question with the more general question of what international reactions can do, especially sanctions. I mean, if we look at the US side, sanctions are already at a level that can hardly go any further, and there are doubts about what the EU sanctions could do if more than symbolism. So what, if anything, is Germany's role in just watching this conflict unfolding further, or are there any more meaningful steps, effective steps, Thomas Loyek asks, that Germany can do? That's one question, and allow me to pick up another question posed by Hertha Dr. in person. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much. In reality, I have two. I'd like to know whether there are discussions, let's say, in Iran or Israel about possible connections in planning, let's say, the war, Hamas, Israel, Iran, to Putin's aggression to Ukraine, because everyone sees that Putin is profiting of this conflict. My second question would be, how do you see, let's say, in future, the cooperation of the Arab states in defending Israel against Iran aggression? Thank you.
Many thanks indeed. So we've got sanctions, we've got connections to Putin's war in Ukraine and Arab states. Perhaps I could hand over to you, Ali, first.
Sure, thank you. First of all, I would disagree about the characterization of where we are at with the sanctions, because what we have in the sanctions debate is a confusion between quantity and quality. in terms of quantity, we have a very dense and wide-ranging international sanctions regime being in place on Iran. But in terms of quality, the subject is much more complicated. First of all, there is the issue of implementation. So it's good to have sanctions on paper, but then you have to implement them. And so what, for instance, the American side is not doing, they're not implementing the sanctions that are on paper. So from day one, they've been allowing Iran to increase its oil exports. So we've seen, Iran, the increase of Iranian oil exports, every month. Now, getting higher and higher, and providing the regime with a financial, with some financial means. So from the American side, especially so, there is a lot of things that can be done in terms of implementing the sanctions that are in place. Secondly, what the German side can do is also something that, they can also make the sanction regime much more robust. So there are several possibilities here. First, we don't have sanctions against the key figures of the Iranian power elite. So this is the first issue. Secondly, we've heard a lot of basically pseudo arguments against the listing of the IRGC in the EU terrorism list. From the foreign ministry saying that there are, legal problems with that, but we know from different sources, from legal experts, but also from European Union institution documents, that the legal basis is there. So it's a lack of a political will. And third, and most important, is the possibility for the EU and the E3, so which is Germany, the UK, and France, the signatory states to the JCPOA, to activate the so-called snapback mechanism of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. The snapback mechanism can be activated when, within the JCPOA, there is a violation. And this can be argued in terms, in the Iranian case, given the massive expansion of the nuclear program beyond the red line set by the JCPOA. And the activation of the snapback mechanism would reintroduce UN comprehensive sanctions on Iran without the possibility of UN Security Council vetoes. So this is a threat that can be used, which was not used so far, and which actually the Iranian side fears, because it would unleash quite important economic pressure also upon the establishment. So, because of our very, very passive and, in my view, basically misguided Iran policy since many years now, and you can look it up on the website of DGAP, I've argued in 2017 that we need to readjust our Iran policy because the JCPOA was good in one sense, because it could curtail Iran's nuclear program, and in that it was a successful step. But what we fail to do as Europeans is to understand the Iran challenge in the broader sense that we ought to do, and what also the region had seen. That is, we have two blind spots within the JCPOA. One is the domestic situation in Iran, where we hope that the JCPOA would open up a space for civil society. Actually, the country was the case. So the elite was very much profiting from the revenues derived from the revitalization of trade with the Western world. 80% of the trade went to semi-state and state entities. And then we also fail to understand that the Islamic Republic as a system does not have any more popular legitimacy. because we've been, taught, a lot of, parallels, by the way, between the Russlandversteher and the Iran-Versteher in Germany. And the second blind spot is the regional policies. So we have failed to address Iran's expansive regional policies, the expansion of the drone and missile programs. All those things were understood by many regional states, but we have defined a Eurocentric view, and we're happy with what we had accomplished. We called it, our crown jewel of, European diplomacy. Fine, but we failed to address the Iran challenge in a wider sense. And now, we've seen after fall 22 with the revolutionary protests in Iran, that the internal situation can lead to destabilization. And we've seen since at least October 7, and I mean, to be honest, since Iran's intervention in Syria much earlier, around 2016, that Iran is not, having the same kind of ambitions that we thought would be within the JCPOA, at least within the preamble of the JCPOA, where the expectation is, formulated that the JCPOA going to lead to a pacification of regional geopolitics. Actually, quite the opposite was the reality. Iran became more expansive. Why so? Because Iran knew that there was no criticism to be expected from the European states, but also not from the Obama administration.
Excellent. I was just going to hand over to Sophie because we only have a few minutes left. And Sophie, if you allow me to throw in a final question about the role of Germany and about the role of the foreign minister in particular, do you think that she is in any way redefining the much debated dictum of the raison d'etat, the Staatsräson, Israel's security being Germany's Staatsräson? Is she redefining and adding anything to the big debate being held in Germany at the time? So you've got a lot of questions on your plate for
I got 3 now. Okay. I gotta do the TV thing where you have a lot of questions and you answer very shortly. Okay, so maybe I start with the previous question that was posted in the chat. With regards to Russia, I would say, well, clearly this escalation helps Russia in the sense that it takes away the focus from Ukraine, from the war in Ukraine, and also possibly resources to support Ukraine. But I don't think Russia would be interested in a fully blown out war, because that also bears risks again for Russia, because Russia then, I mean, that might pose a threat to its operations in Syria, like a blown out, like a real retaliation against Iran might also be a problem for the Iranian support for Russia in its war against Ukraine. Just thinking about the drones that are playing a big role in Ukraine. That was the first question. Second question with regards to the Arab nations. Israel takes this as a big win that they formed this coalition that helped them to fend off the Iranian attack. And that Arab nations, even though obviously they communicated differently, supported Israel. And that could be taken as a big diplomatic or political win that will probably be in some way endangered if Israel now retaliates against Iran, because these Arab nations are already playing a very delicate balancing act, because they need to explain to their population why they're basically supporting Israel while there's this war going on in Gaza that people in the Arab world obviously find absolutely harrowing. So we'll have to see how this develops depending on Israel's reaction now. They might lose a lot of what they've won, depending on how they react. And with regards to Annalena Baerbock, has she redefined it? Well, generally speaking, I think she's tried to say, she's tried to be critical with regards to what's happening in Gaza. She has tried to put more pressure on Israel with regards to the humanitarian situation. This was the whole debate prior to this Iranian attack, I would generally say, but all of this in the end are all these warnings and everything. They don't mean much if they're not followed up by any sort of consequences. And we could see this, and the consequences would be questioning arms support, weapon support for Israel. And we could see what difference that can have when the US actually did start questioning that, even if only indirectly. So generally speaking, I would say no, especially now. I was at the press conference with Annalena Baerbock yesterday. She's very clear as to where Germany stands vis-a-vis Israel. And even though there are all these warnings now, trying to convince Israel not to go for a retaliation against Iran and to urging restraint, in the end, if it comes push to shove, I can hardly imagine a scenario where the Western allies would not support Israel. And I think that is what especially the US is so worried about, that they would then potentially be dragged into a wider war, because they will, to some extent, have to support and defend Israel. And at some point in this tit for tat game, maybe American bases or American institutions might be attacked, and then this could all spiral. And well, this might be could end to this whole session. We don't know what's going to happen, but the fear is definitely there that something bigger could happen as a consequence of this tit for tat game, where maybe somebody just makes a mistake or miscalculates. Because I think that's also what we're all wondering. Why did this attack in Syria happen? What calculations did the Israelis make when doing that? Did they just underestimate the Israeli, the Iranian reaction? Possibly. They've done these kind of attacks in the past, but this was definitely on a higher level. Or was there some sort of calculation behind it? We don't know it. Probably just an underestimation of the situation, and that it doesn't matter in the end. It's very dangerous.
Thank you. These were a lot of insights in a very short period of time. Thank you so much both for joining us on short notice. And this is an evolving and developing conflict, and we will certainly come back to it in future iterations of our morning briefings. But for now, let me thank you and everyone in the audience for joining, and wish you a lovely day.